Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to dive into a really heavy topic today, something we all need to understand better. Gun violence and teens. We often think car accidents are the biggest risk, but it's actually gun violence that's a leading cause of death for young people in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a tough reality.
It is, and we're not shying away from that. You've given us a ton of research on this, training materials, statistics, the whole nine yards, so we're going to unpack it all carefully. One thing that struck me is how we usually focus on what happens after a shooting. But
Yeah.
these materials you've provided, they really look at the bigger picture, right? All the different things that contribute to this kind of violence.
It's like trying to understand a big forest fire. You can't just focus on the flames themselves. You got to look at everything, the dry brush, is there wind, lack of rain,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, to really get how it happened, how to stop it from happening again.
Exactly. And speaking of getting a clearer picture, there's this section on school shootings I found really insightful. It uses the Parkland shooting as a case study, which is obviously a tough one, but it brings up some important points. For me, the most striking thing was just how many warning signs there were with the Parkland shooter. Like, he had a whole history of disturbing behavior, threats. He was even obsessed with violence online, and it wasn't a secret.
And that's exactly what the report highlights. This wasn't something that just came out of nowhere. It was a slow buildup, and there were chances to intervene that were missed. So it makes you think, how can we equip people to recognize these red flags and actually do something about them?
Right, like how do we make sure those warning signs don't get ignored?
Exactly. And the report points out some systemic issues too, like we don't have enough mental health resources in schools, and there's often a lack of communication between, say, law enforcement and teachers.
Yeah.
It really shows we need a more comprehensive approach to prevention.
So it's not just about reacting after something happens. It's about trying to stop it from happening in the first place,
That's the goal.
which means understanding all the factors that contribute, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, the report goes into the Parkland shooter's background, trauma, isolation, this desperate need to belong that ended up finding an outlet in really dangerous online spaces.
Which is really scary when you think about how many young people are struggling with similar things.
It is. It's a reminder of how vulnerable they are, especially without the right support.
And this is where things get even more complicated. The report mentions dangerous ideologies that played a role in shaping the shooter's worldview. And I'm curious to dig into that more, to understand what those ideologies were, how they took hold.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting, because it wasn't just about access to weapons, but access to ideas. The shooter was consuming all this extremist content online, stuff that glorifies violence and offers this really twisted sense of belonging. It shows the dark side of the digital age, how these platforms that are meant to connect people can be used to spread hate and incite violence.
And that's not just an American problem, right? These ideologies can spread like wildfire online, across borders, preying on vulnerable people everywhere.
Unfortunately, that's true, and it really highlights the importance of, I think, media literacy, especially for young people. We need to teach them how to think critically about what they see online, how to spot manipulation and bias, because not everything they see is real or true.
It's like they need a filter for the digital age.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And building that filter takes a multi-pronged approach. It's about education, parents getting involved, and yeah, maybe even tech companies taking more responsibility for what's on their platforms.
Absolutely. And, we've been focusing on school shootings, which are terrifying, but they're just one part of a much bigger issue, right? The research you shared mentions a chilling statistic. Over 3,500 kids and teens die from gun violence every year in the U.S. So we're talking about an epidemic here, one that reaches far beyond school hallways.
You're right, it goes way beyond that.
And that's why we need to broaden our perspective. Look at all the different ways gun violence impacts young people. We're talking gang violence, often driven by poverty and lack of opportunity. Domestic violence, where kids get caught in the crossfire. Even accidental shootings, which are a tragic reminder of what happens when guns aren't secured properly.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about all the different ways this violence tears families and communities apart. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. But even within that darkness, there are glimmers of hope. The material you shared highlights some incredible stories of resilience, young people who've been through unimaginable trauma and come out the other side as advocates for change, artists using their pain to create something beautiful, communities banding together to break the cycle of violence.
It's a good reminder that even in the face of such darkness, the human spirit always seeks out the light.
Absolutely. And those small acts of courage, compassion, connection, they can make a world of difference. It's true. Those stories are really powerful. They remind us that even when people face these horrible tragedies, there's this amazing ability to survive, to heal, to want to build a better future.
It's like finding those little glimmers of hope in the darkest moments.
Yeah.
And speaking of building a better future, you included some really interesting stuff about evidence-based ways to actually prevent this kind of violence. It's not just about reacting after something bad happens. It's about being proactive, about creating safer communities for everyone. One strategy that stuck with me was mentoring, like the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, that kind of thing. Having a good adult in their life, someone who's consistently there for them, it can be huge for kids, especially those who might not have a lot of support at home.
Oh, absolutely. The research shows that mentoring can be a real game changer for kids who are at risk. It helps them feel like they belong, like they matter. And that can make all the difference in terms of steering them away from dangerous paths.
It's about giving them something positive to focus on, right?
Exactly.
And it's not just about keeping them out of trouble. It's about helping them really thrive. The materials you sent also mentioned social emotional learning programs, or SEL. I'll be honest, before this whole deep dive, I didn't really get what SEL was all about. But now I see it as such a crucial part of education, and it's often overlooked.
It's huge. And what I find so interesting about it is that SEL really gets at the root of so many issues related to violence. Like it's about giving kids the tools to actually understand and manage their emotions, to build healthy relationships, to make good decisions, and to have empathy for others. Those are skills that will help them throughout their entire lives, not just in school.
It's like giving them a toolkit for life.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the materials you sent even talk about specific things like conflict resolution training, even peer mediation. So teaching kids how to work through disagreements peacefully, respectfully. It's about breaking those cycles of aggression that we see so often.
Just showing them that there's another way, a better way to deal with conflict.
Right.
And sometimes it starts with just having those open and honest conversations about the dangers of gun violence. And I know it can be scary to bring up these topics, especially with kids. But the research offers some really good advice on how to do it effectively. One thing that stood out to me was the emphasis on age-appropriate communication. It's not about bombarding them with scary statistics or lecturing them. It's about creating a safe space for them to share their thoughts and feelings, to ask questions, and to know that they'll be heard and taken seriously.
It's about empowering them with information and making them feel like they have a voice. And that includes acknowledging the role that social media plays in all of this, right? I mean, we've talked about how online spaces can expose kids to violence and dangerous ideologies. But how do we also use those same platforms for good? How do we help them be smarter, more responsible digital citizens?
That's the million-dollar question. The material mentions media literacy, which is just becoming more and more important these days. It's about teaching kids to really think critically about what they're seeing online, to spot things like bias, to tell the difference between real information and fake stuff.
And understand how these algorithms work, how they can influence what they see and how they think.
It's like we're all navigating this digital maze, and kids need a map.
Exactly. It's about giving them that map and teaching them how to use it. And that includes talking to them about their own online behavior and how what they do online can have real-life consequences. We've seen how quickly something that seems harmless online can spiral out of control.
It's about helping them understand that their words and their actions have weight, both online and offline.
Absolutely. And, while the digital world definitely presents its own set of challenges, it also offers some incredible opportunities for positive change. I mean, it's inspiring to see young people using social media to raise awareness about gun violence, to mobilize their peers, to demand action from their leaders. They're harnessing the power of these platforms to build movements and fight for a safer world.
It's like they're taking back the narrative. Their voices are so powerful, and they're not afraid to use them.
Exactly. They give me so much hope.
It's so true. They're the ones who are going to change the world. And speaking of change, one thing we haven't touched on yet is the healing process. What happens after someone, especially a young person, experiences gun violence? You included some really helpful stuff about that.
Yeah, it's so important to talk about that side of things too, because healing from trauma, it's a journey. It takes time. And there's no one right way to do it.
And the materials you shared, they really emphasize that. It's not about just brushing things under the rug and pretending everything's okay. It's about acknowledging the huge impact this kind of violence has on a young person's life, on their mental and emotional well-being. Trauma, it's not just about physical wounds. It goes so much deeper than that.
Exactly. And it can show up in so many different ways, right? Like anxiety, flashbacks, trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating, even just changes in their behavior, how
Yeah.
they interact with people. It's like their whole world has been turned upside down.
It's like their sense of safety, of security, it's just shattered.
Yeah, and that's a really hard thing to rebuild.
And that's where those support systems become so vital, right? Having people who understand what they're going through, who can offer a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, that kind of unconditional support can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And the research really emphasizes that. It's about creating a space where these young people feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to talk about their pain and their fears without feeling judged. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just listen, just validate what they're going through and let them know that they're not alone.
It's about reminding them that they're loved, that they're worthy, that there's still hope. And beyond that emotional support, are there other things that can help?
Definitely. The materials talk about the importance of practical coping skills, like self-care. I know it sounds simple, but when you're dealing with trauma, taking care of yourself, it can feel impossible. But things like making sure you're eating, getting enough sleep, even just going for a walk outside, those things can really help.
It's like those basic needs, they become even more important when you're trying to heal.
Exactly. It's about giving your mind and body a chance to recover. And it's not selfish to prioritize those things. It's essential.
It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first, right?
Yeah.
You can't help anyone else if you're not taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it's not just about those basic needs either. It's about finding those little things that bring you joy, you know, whether it's music or art or spending time with loved ones. Those moments of joy, they can make a big difference.
It's about reclaiming those pieces of yourself that might feel lost or broken.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember that healing, it's not linear. There will be good days and bad days, steps forward and setbacks. That's normal. It's part of the process.
It's a journey.
Exactly. And it's a journey that takes a lot of courage and resilience.
And sometimes that resilience, it comes from finding meaning and purpose, even in the face of such incredible pain. Some of the most powerful stories you shared were about young people who've channeled their experiences with gun violence into something positive, like activism. They're using their voices, their stories to fight for change to prevent this from happening to others.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can still find a way to shine through.
It's truly inspiring. And, this deep dive, it's been heavy at times. There's no denying that. But it's also been really hopeful. It's shown us the power of resilience, the incredible work being done to prevent gun violence and support those who've been affected by it. And most importantly, it's reminded us that a better future is possible. If you or someone you know is struggling with this issue, please reach out for help. You're not alone. There are resources available, people who care, and together we can make a difference. Thanks for joining us for this important conversation.